Alright, I thought I was going to be able to do chapter 13 in 2 videos, but it looks like it's just a hair too long. Bentley lowered his trembling hands, opened his eyes, and raised his head. A man was scraping up the aisle toward the altar. He was holding a bottle with a flaming rag stuck in it. He was a ruin of a man. His hair was tangled and filthy. There was an oval patch on the side of his head where scabs had taken the place of hair. His eyes were sunk deep into his skull, and his cheekbones were covered with broken red splotches. His nose was smashed in. His mouth, surrounded by the dirty chaos of an unkempt beard, opened and closed, as he tried to force out the words of a hymn. But the rasping chant that came from him was just guttural noise studded with words: Father, mercy, and peace. Even when he wasn't saying words, the mouth opened and closed mechanically, as if he were doing a grotesque imitation of a hymn singer. He wore a black suit. His body had shriveled within it. His chest, Bentley saw, was bare. The ankles above his cracked, wrinkled shoes were naked, too. The strange creature, a human shape reduced to a rubble of filth and bruised flesh, shuffled toward the altar. The flame danced on the church wall. Bentley gasped. A grotesque crucifix cast bizarre shadows. A piece of board had been tied diagonally onto a twisted tree branch that leaned against the wall. A child's doll, unclothed and wigless, had been nailed by its hand to one end of the board. It dangled lifelessly, its inanimate eyes staring into the gloom of the church. The broken man put his flaming bottle on the altar. He clasped his hands and lowered his body in supplication before his votary. One leg crumpled and collapsed. The man fell on his side with a thud. He made no effort to unclasp his hands and cushion the fall. His head hit the floor, but he neither cried out nor winced. It was as if his body were so corrupted that it no longer interested him. He lay on his side, his eyes shining in the torchlight, as he gazed up at the altar. His voice rattled in his throat. "Why won't you send the sign?" he begged. "What do you want? Penance?" He raised his clenched hands and struck himself on the forehead 3 times. "Repent!" he barked after each soft blow. He raised his eyes to the flaming altar again. "Nobody can do it all by himself. I need a sign!" He unclasped his hands, rolled on his stomach, and raised his head. His toothless lips curled into a grimace of disdain. He spat upward. His saliva glistened on the wall behind the cross. Then, as quickly as his rage had flared, it subsided. His head fell forward, slamming against the floor, and he began to sob. "I didn't mean it. It's just you won't send the sign." The black shoulders jerked up and down, and a low wailing came forth. Bentley stood up. His mouth was half open, and his heart was torn between dread and pity. "Mr. Tally?" he whispered. "Mr. Tally, it's me, Bentley." The apparition of the Reverend Tally was not interrupted. He rolled over on his side again, and the face his craning neck lifted toward the flame was blotted with tears. "You could do a miracle," he rasped. "You could make it so there would be a little place for me somewhere, a hospital." He looked eager. "Comfort the sick, preach thy word. A hospital with a place for me. I wouldn't do it any more then, not a drop, I promise. Please." Bentley barely recognized the man lying on the floor. Fear suffocated his pity for a moment. In the wreck of Mr. Tally, Bentley saw the inexorable power of Prince Ombra. The clergyman hadn't known that years before he was tempting disaster when he had gathered a lonely boy into his care. In those days, when Bentley was little, the Reverend Tally's selflessness and Christian love had been manifest in every hour of his life. Bentley remembered how clean Mr. Tally had once been. His white supplice, his shining hands. Now Bentley saw the result of a long struggle. Prince Ombra had penetrated the holy light around the clergyman, and the human devastation he had made was terrible. Bentley began to move down the side aisle. The gloom in the great cavern of the church seemed untouched by Ombra's triumphant fire flickering on the altar. As he approached slowly, brushing around the back of each pew, Bentley was afraid that Mr. Tally would suddenly turn on him. Then he wondered if, by being spoken to, Mr. Tally could become his former self. Bentley stood behind the rail at the front of the church, watching and listening as Reverend Tally's beseeching continued. Even at the distance of 10 feet, the reek of stale alcohol and body musk was unbearable. Bentley crept toward the derelict as he would toward a dangerous beast. "Mr. Tally," he whispered again. "Mr. Tally, it's Bentley." Reverend Tally abruptly stopped pleading. One eye, a drop of flame shining in it, peered over his shoulder. It stared at Bentley. "Don't you know me?" Bentley asked. Mr. Tally's eye gleamed with fear. "You're green," he rasped. "No, I'm not." "Dead green of the sea," Mr. Tally exclaimed, hugging his ribs. His shoes made a frantic scraping and thudding on the floor as he shuffled to get away from Bentley. "Sea and wind, cold, go away!" Bentley took a cautious step toward him. "Mr. Tally, I'm not going to hurt you. It's Bentley Ellicott." Reverend Tally uncoiled his body and slithered backward on all fours toward a space between the altar and the wall. He was spitting and hissing. His face was white beneath the grime. "Lucifer!" he cried. Bentley shook his head. "Listen, Mr. Tally, you've got to remember me. Bentley. We used to go fishing and take walks and stuff. Please remember." Mr. Tally crouched, staring. Then suddenly a new hallucination possessed him. He lunged, and before Bentley could jump out of the way, Mr. Tally had grabbed his belt with both hands. The filthy, quivering face was 6 inches from Bentley, exhaling its stench. "The sign! Thou art Michael and Gabriel! The sign sent to me!" Bentley grabbed one of the clergyman's dirt-caked wrists and tried to wrench himself free. "I'm not!" he yelled. "Let go!" But the creature that once was his friend held him fast. "The messenger of God," Mr. Tally prattled. "He has not forsaken me." The hands yanked urgently at Bentley's belt. "He has heard my prayer, and he has sent thee to tell me what I shall be given." The insane minister scrabbled closer to Bentley on his knees, his face uplifted, his mouth with cracked teeth and coated tongue gaping wide in a demented grin. "Tell me, tell, Michael, great archangel! Wrestler of Satan, conqueror of sin, Michael, tell poor child Homer." "Mr. Tally, I haven't got anything to tell you." "Michael," Mr. Tally whispered, his face still spread in its idiotic grin. He wriggled closer, and Bentley stumbled backward, but Mr. Tally held him. "Michael, listen, Michael. I'll make my confession again. Perhaps he didn't hear it all. I'll do it again." His whisper had become a frantic babble. "Lust, drunkenness, and fornication. I'm guilty of all these, Father, and I repent me of my sins." The grin disappeared. The cracked lips curved down into a child's weeping grimace. "You saw into the soul of Abraham, Father," Mr. Tally bawled. "See into mine. I lusted for my neighbor's wife and committed fornication with her. You know my penance is sincere, Father. See into my heart. I prayed most sincerely for her soul when she died. I was a friend to her child. I tried to love him, Father." Holding on to Mr. Tally's wrists, Bentley stared down in horror. He didn't understand all the words, but he knew who and what they were about. Reverend Tally's eyes closed. His body jerked with his sobs. "I did not love the boy. You know it, Father, but I tried." Tears tracked down his face's grime that had been turned into mud by previous tears. "You saw my soul burn as I hated the boy because he was the flesh of her greater love." He yanked several times at Bentley's belt. "Tell him, Michael!" He let go. As Bentley staggered back, the clergyman crumpled onto the floor. "I tried to love the boy, Father. He thought I did. Doesn't that count for something? The wanting? I am Abraham, Lord. Read my heart. I only drink because of the loneliness." His voice broke, and he beat his forehead on the dusty floorboards. "See my remorse, God. Please forgive me." Flame from the bottles through the shadows of his heaving shoulders. "Please, Lord, just a little place in thy great world." Bentley fled. He fled from the terrible light into the darkness below. Shock stunned him and broke his thinking into pieces. Like a frenzied animal, he leapt over and over again in the gloom, tearing his clothes and skin as he scrambled through the window, as he ran and ran beneath the cold stars. He beat his hands on his ears, trying to drive the words of the madman from his mind. Bentley wanted to pound it all out of his head before he had to think and feel. He stumbled, sprawled, and hurt his arm. He jumped up and ran, limping and shouting. but shouting no words, just making noise so he couldn't hear Ombra's jubilant cackle and the ranting of Mr. Tally. Bentley ran beyond all sense and knowing, and when at last he collapsed with the sweet aroma of grass and earth on his face, he slept instantly because he didn't want to be awake any more. And that's chapter 13.